When a woman likes you and finds you attractive, she's more willing to comply to you, and the more she complies to you, the more she invests in you both emotionally and psychologically. This is the concept that is taught in the compliance ladder, a model I came up with a few years ago to help you understand the relationship between a woman's compliance and her attraction towards you, and also to help you to figure out where you stand with a woman as time goes on in a relationship with her. Now, there's a lot of things that go into what the compliance ladder is, and I highly suggest before you continue with this video, you go over here and watch part one so you understand the basics of just how the compliance ladder works, how it behaves, the fundamentals of it, etc. Because in this video, what we're going to go into is how to actually use the compliance ladder practically, what is involved in the compliance ladder, and how to use it in a way that actually can benefit you right now in your dating. Okay, in order to understand how to best use the compliance ladder, you got to understand the scenarios, the areas where it's the most useful. And in order to do that, we have to understand a concept called compliance tests. This right here is the key to using the compliance ladder. And this is going to be your saving grace and your North Star for knowing where exactly on the compliance ladder you are. A compliance test is pretty straightforward if you ask me, right? Self-explanatory. A compliance test is simply you testing for compliance in a woman. You giving the woman a test of compliance to see if she actually complies or defies. And her behavior towards this compliance test, whatever test it may be, whatever degree of compliance you're asking of her at that point in time, will let you know just where on the entire compliance ladder you are at that point in time with that woman. Now, the thing about the compliance test you can give a woman is that obviously they kind of vary in degrees, right? The compliance test you'll give a woman right here in general compliance is going to look very different than the compliance test that you give a woman in the next stage up here, which is value, investment, and sacrifice. And that obviously will look very different than the ones you'll give a woman in deep connection. And the only difference between them is really just the degree of sacrifice. That's really all it comes down to. What are you asking this woman to do for you? And how realistic is it at this point in time, given the context of you and her, to actually go through with giving that sacrifice, with going through with the sacrifice on your behalf, right? Does it make sense for her to do so with the level of investment she has? And that's kind of the whole point, right? If her investment in you isn't that high, then she's probably not going to be willing to do some high level compliance, not just yet. As opposed to if her investment in you is indeed high, then she is obviously willing to do all those things for you, right? It's very important you understand and remember that. What makes a compliance of any kind valuable in terms of the level of investment you can get out of a woman is the sacrifice involved. And all sacrifice means, as far as this model is concerned, is how much out of her way she has to go to fulfill your request. The harder it is, the more investment she has to put into it. The more investment, the better, right? An analogy I like to use is I take it from the Bible. Look at the Bible. If you've read your Bible, you'll notice something very interesting about the way God has a relationship with all the prophets in the Bible. At some point in every single one of these stories, God requires some kind of a sacrifice from this prophet, whatever prophet you're reading about. And like clockwork, God will always ask his prophets for something that they're not really ready to give most of the time, something that is difficult for them to want to let go of. My favorite example has to be Abraham, right? God appears to Abraham, asks Abraham to have a son, calls him the father of many nations. He speaks that into existence. And after a few missed attempts by Abraham and his wife Sarah, they finally have his first legitimate son, Isaac. And then a few years pass and God goes, you know what? I require that son of yours as a living sacrifice. Now, put yourself in Abraham's shoes. Old man, damn near decrepit. His wife is not in a position to have children anymore, right? They're not exactly the most fertile young couple. And so, even after being blessed by this child by God, God is now asking him, hey, that one kid that you do have, I'm gonna need that up out of you, my son. That's not an easy sacrifice to make, right? That is not an easy thing to say yes to. But Abraham was willing to make the sacrifice. Now, for those of you who don't know the rest of the story, don't worry. The end of that story is that Isaac doesn't get sacrificed eventually. In fact, when Abraham is about to drive a knife through Isaac's body, an angel of God stops Abraham and goes, no, chill out. God doesn't want you to do that. He just wanted to test to see if you have faith in him. You see that lamb over there stuck in the bushes? Yeah, that's your sacrifice. Go sacrifice that. Right? And that's an important thing to remember, is that even God Almighty is concerned with the degree of sacrifice that you're willing to let go of. I suggest that you bring that kind of thinking into the compliance ladder, the compliance model, because that's as important. If you're going through the compliance ladder and the sacrifices that you're asking of the woman are not up to par, and you're going to naturally fall down. Don't forget from what we talked about in part 1. If you're not going up in the compliance ladder, you're going down in the compliance ladder. There's no stagnation. There's no such thing as being stuck in a particular stage or the other for a long period of time. It doesn't exist. If you're not going up, you're going down. Speaking of going down, that brings me to the second thing I want to talk about right now in this video. Let's say you are going down the compliance ladder, right? How exactly do you get back up? How exactly do you course correct and begin to ascend back up the compliance ladder? Well, first we have to understand why that happens, right? We understand on some level that the reason you would go down a compliance ladder with a woman is because you're losing investment and attraction, right? Because don't forget, she complies and she invests, and because she invests, she gets attracted to you, and because she's attracted to you, she's more willing to comply. It's cyclical, but there's also a negative cycle there. She defies because she's divesting, and she's divesting because she's repulsed by you, and she's repulsed by you, and as a result, she's going to defy you. So it's cyclical as well, right? So you're going down the compliance ladder because you're losing respect and you're losing attraction. That's important to note, because that in itself right there is a seed of information you need to understand how to get back up. Always remember this, and you need to write this down if you have to. Compliance in general, right, is not the cause. It is the effect. It is not what actually makes a woman more attracted to you. It is the symptom of attraction. It is a byproduct of a woman being willing to invest in you, aka a woman that already sees massive value in you, recognizes value in you already. So you cannot use compliance, raw compliance, or just asking a woman to make more sacrifices for you or do more stuff for you as a way to get back up the compliance ladder. This is a mistake that I've seen a few of my students make in the past, right? This is my fault, obviously. I didn't go out of my way to explain that part, but I'm doing that here right now to make sure it doesn't happen again. I call it a compliance ladder, and it's all about understanding compliance. But understand, the compliance is just a roadmap for figuring out the levels of attraction and investment she has in you. The compliance itself cannot create more attraction unless the attraction is already there. It can only snowball it. It cannot create it from scratch. The only thing that creates true raw attraction from scratch is tension, which obviously I'll have to make an entire new video about. But if you haven't seen my talk about tension yet, or understand how I view tension and why I think it's one of the most important things by far about game and learning game, then you can go watch it over here. I have an entire series where I talk about mindset and tension and some of the most fundamental things you need to understand about the game. So go watch tension over there and, get yourself acquainted with why tension is very important. But back to this. When you have tension, you have the opportunity to create attraction. And the way you do that, the way you exponentially increase that attraction, is by using compliance. Compliance is more like a solidifier. Compliance is the tangible proof that attraction is there. You get that? So when you're finding yourself going down the compliance ladder, you can't be like, oh, I know, I'm just gonna get her to do more stuff for me and then I'm gonna go back up. It doesn't work that way. You should use that as a litmus test to know, oh, okay, cool. She's not feeling me right now. The attraction is dying, the respect is dying. So the first thing you should begin to try to correct, the moment you notice that you're gaining defiance and losing steam and coming down the compliance ladder, is do things to spark attraction. Do things to increase her attraction in you so that you can then go back into this nice little cycle of, now that she's attracted to me, she will be willing to do stuff for me. And because she's willing to do stuff for me, she's now further invested in me. Right? So if you're losing attraction and respect, what does that look like? It looks like the woman is pulling away from you. It looks like the woman is going out of her way to avoid you, not do anything with you, to you, or for you, or around you, right, etc. If you've ever been through a breakup, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That feeling of the woman slowly disappearing from your life, pulling back, pulling away. All you got to do in that point is understand where you are, like how far down the compliance ladder you are in this moment. And you very easily figure it out, by the way, by what checkpoint you were last at. If you've already gotten past the I love you phase, or establishing that there is love there in the relationship, and then all of a sudden you're pulling back away from that and she's not as loving anymore, then you know that you're somewhere below that stage. If the pullback is even worse to the point where you're not even having sex anymore, then you know it's even worse than that. You're probably very close to an actual split, an actual breakup, right? So all you have to do from that point is understand, one, do not panic. It's not the end of the world. Even if you end up leaving the compliance ladder with her completely, it's okay. You won't die. Just make sure you stop showing these two things. One, neediness. Two, seeking validation or spinelessness. Right? The reason you're losing attraction and losing respect, more than likely, in my humble experience, from what I've been able to see in both myself and thousands of people around the world at this point, is that if a girl is losing attraction and respect for you, and as a result divesting from you, choosing to not comply to you anymore, defiance, it's usually because you're beginning to make her the center of your world. You're beginning to make her your ultimate priority and your end goal, your end point. And she smells that, you see. Now you're way more concerned about how much you can comply to her than how much she complies to you. I always say this. I don't care how much you like her. I don't care how much you like her. It's never about how much you like her. It's about how much she likes you. And when you're needy or seeking validation and spineless, that is, you're scared to offend her, right? You're scared to say things to piss her off or to disagree with her. You're essentially in the mental state of someone that is so concerned about what they can do for her, they're no longer taking account of what she's doing for him, for them, for yourself, right? In this case. So you need to eliminate these two behaviors and all the behaviors that you have that point towards these immediately. And that involves needing to spend as much time with her as possible. That involves trying your hardest to impress her. That involves going out of your way to not offend her, right? And try to micromanage her emotions while she treats yours recklessly, right? All these other things that you do to subjugate yourself to her. Stop that. That's step one. Stop that. Just stop doing those things. From that point on, you want to start doing the exact opposite. You want to start showing complete independence from her, like a lack of neediness, which is the opposite for that is complete independence, and spine, an ability to offend her, an ability to do and say things that she doesn't agree with. This will help you to reestablish some balls in the relationship, make her begin to respect you more, make her begin to see you as a sexual viable threat again. But there is one bit of bad news you have to keep in mind while you're going back up the compliance ladder. You see these checkpoints? Remember how interesting they were to pass the first time around? When you start going down the compliance ladder to the point where you start descending past these checkpoints, and then you fix your behavior, stop being needy, become more independent, become less spineless, you grow a backbone, less seeking invalidation, and you start going up the compliance ladder again, by the time you get to those same old checkpoints, you're not always going to have the easiest time getting past them. In fact, full disclosure, it's going to be harder getting past the checkpoints. It's going to be harder this time around. And the reason for that is simple. You've essentially passed her checkpoints and then come down those same checkpoints, which signals to her that you probably passed the first time as a fluke. So her biology drives her to make sure this time around that she's really sure that you are indeed deserving of these higher levels, higher stages up on the compliance ladder. So she will naturally test you harder, much harder. Think about it like this, as an example. Have you ever noticed, maybe you've made this mistake before with a girl that you, for instance, went on a date with? The date was not the best at all. And from that point on, you've pretty much had an impossible time trying to get this girl on another date, right? A much harder time trying to get this same girl that you were on a date with before to come out to see you again. Much harder than the girl that you just met, a new girl, a different girl. That's on purpose. That makes sense. Why is that? Again, goes back to what I was just saying. Once you've passed a particular checkpoint, which in this case would be the date, right? This would be somewhere around here. It would be, we'll call that a date, right? Once you pass that checkpoint and then you go back down because you had a terrible day, you couldn't manage it correctly, you weren't the leader she thought you would be, you didn't have the correct body language or behavioral cues, your decision making was off, and you didn't genuinely make her feel safe or attracted to you. To get back up to this point is going to take a lot more work than you originally had before. Because why would she reinvest time and attention into you when she can go and put that time and attention in another guy that's not going to fuck up at that stage? Same thing with sex. It's even harder to get past the major checkpoints, because when you get past the major checkpoints, you've essentially crossed into a different stage of the compliance ladder. So to go down those same checkpoints, getting back up, difficult. That's why it's almost always better to just start things fresh with a new girl than to try to rekindle things with an old one, right? So keep that in mind. You're gonna have quite a ways to get back up and get through those particular checkpoints, right? But yeah, that's pretty much all you need to know right now as far as how the compliance ladder works, how you can use it practically, how you can go back up the compliance ladder if you're falling down. Now, speaking of sex, I'm gonna give you a little tiny gift for this portion of the video because you stayed this long. I have secretly, very secretly, put out a course that people have been literally bothering me to put out for at least a year now, called Sex Hypnosis. And I have hidden a link to it somewhere in my course that is currently still free, Self-Belief 2.0. I can't keep that one free for too long, but the link to Sex Hypnosis is somewhere in Self-Belief 2.0. I'm not gonna tell you where. You gotta figure it out. And honestly, I'm doing that on purpose because I can't afford for a lot of people to have sex hypnosis. That's a little too dangerous. It's a little too powerful. I can't sleep well at night knowing that I put that kind of power in just anyone's hands. So if you're lucky enough to get to this point, congratulations, but please don't tell anybody. I'm begging you, keep this to yourself. All right? In the meantime, though, go get that and watch one of these videos right here. I'm sure it's a great video, whatever I'm pointing out right now. So get to it, have fun. It's been Jason's Favorite Scientist with all this information. What you must.